And welcome to the League of Women Voters of Lane County's ballot measures presentation. During this session, viewers and listeners will be able to ask questions, and we will answer them as best we can. I'm Charles C. Kaler, president of the Lane County League. The League is a political, nonpartisan organization whose mission is to educate voters in an unbiased way. Those who fully understand the issues are the educated voters the Founding Fathers envisioned. There are two kinds of statewide measures on the ballot. One amends the Oregon State Constitution and, if passed, can only be changed with a vote of the people. Three measures are statutory, which, if passed, institute laws that may be changed by the Oregon legislature. We will cover all four statewide measures and, because of time constraints, 4 local measures. Two knowledgeable leaguers will give explanations of the 4 statewide measures. Then we'll answer questions from the audience for 15 minutes. Next, the local ballot measures will be presented, and afterward there will be another chance to ask questions on those 4. We intend this session to last no longer than 90 minutes, and if less is needed, we'll end sooner. But if, at the end of the presentation, there are more questions, we'll continue to answer for up to 90 minutes. For questions, please use the chat button to ask. For most Zoom users, it will be at the bottom of the screen. You may type in your questions as you think of them during the presentations, and they'll be answered after all 4 are explained. Our presenters are Pat Hawken and Nancy Mills. First up is Nancy with ballot measure 107.
Hello, it's wonderful to have you with us today. Ballot measure 107 is the campaign finance limit amendment. It's a referral by the 2020 Oregon legislature. It amends the state of Oregon Constitution to allows limiting political campaign contributions and expenditures, requiring disclosure of political campaign contributions and expenditures, and requiring political campaign advertisements to identify who paid for them. So let's begin with a little bit of background. In 1997, the Oregon Supreme Court ruled that the state constitution prohibits limiting contributions to or expenditures of political campaigns or campaigns intended to influence the outcome of an election, because this would restrain the free expression of opinion. There was a 2006 attempt to change the state constitution, which failed, and to pass campaign contribution limits, as well as 2 more recent election limit proposals, which passed for Multnomah County in 2016 and Portland in 2019. These also were challenged and have not gone into effect. However, in April 2020, as part of the Multnomah County litigation, the Oregon Supreme Court ruled that the Oregon Constitution does allow limits on campaign donations as long as they do not target expression. Limits on expenditures are still prohibited. So, what is the rationale for this measure? Oregon is one of only 5 states with no limits on campaign contributions. This has, as you might expect, resulted in growingly expensive, more expensive elections, which are typified by the 2018 gubernatorial election, which cost almost $40 million. In addition, the lack of limits on campaign finances means that Oregon is ranked 6th in the country for total corporate money given to the average lawmaker. Per capita, it's 1st in terms of corporate giving. And in case you're curious about where that giving is coming from, it's 1st in the timber money donations, which is of course not surprising, but 2nd in the country for restaurants and lodging, and 3rd for drug companies. What are the effects of this measure? The measure will limit contributions made to political campaigns, such as candidates, ballot measures, etc., in a way that won't prevent candidates and political committees from adequate resources for effective advocacy. It will require the disclosure of contributions or expenditures made by political campaigns or by others trying to influence the outcome of an election. It will require that political campaign ads or ads made to influence the outcome of any election identify the persons or entities paying for them. It will limit expenditures made with political campaigns or to influence the outcome of any election to the extent permitted under the Constitution of the United States. This will apply to any laws that have been passed on or after January 1st, 2016. It's important to emphasize that this measure is the result of actions by lawmakers across the state and approved by a broad bipartisan vote. There are a multitude of groups supporting yes on 107, which includes the Alliance for Democracy, Oregon, Cause of Oregon, Common Cause, Basic Rights Oregon, the Oregon League of Conservation Voters, Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. The list goes on. And what do they say in support? Because Oregon is one of only 5 states with no contribution limits of any kind, large corporations, wealthy donors, and special interest groups have undue influence over the candidates who are elected. Reducing the influence of money in politics will allow candidates to compete more equitably for public office. And there's the issue of transparency. The public has a fundamental right to know the true source of money spent on our elections. Finally, this reform will promote citizen participation in the political process by reducing the influence of special interests and the wealthy. There is no organized opposition to this measure, but the Libertarian Party has spoken against it to the Oregon Senate. What are some of the objections a person might have? There's a sense that special interests reflect the interests and voices of many ordinary citizens, that limiting campaign contributions and expenditures does not level the playing field. Campaign donations don't influence the behavior of elected officials. And finally, the measure would weaken the freedom of speech for Oregonians, and political speech deserves the most protection, not the least. And with that, I will turn the stage over to Pat for ballot measure 108.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to be speaking about ballot measure 108, which is a cigarette and e-cigarette tax increase for health programs. It's a statutory measure referred by the Oregon legislature. Its purpose is to discourage tobacco and nicotine use and to raise revenue from medical services. Currently in Oregon, a tax of $1.33 is imposed on a pack of 20 cigarettes, and cigars are taxed at 65% of their wholesale cost. However, nicotine inhalant delivery systems, such as e-cigarettes and vaping products, are not taxed by the state of Oregon. 28 other states, including California and Washington, currently have taxes on e-cigarettes and vaping products. Measure 108 would increase the cigarette tax by $2 a pack to $3.33 per pack. It would increase the maximum tax on cigars to $1 a cigar, and it would provide for cigarillos to be taxed as cigarettes. And then, in addition, this measure establishes a new tax on nicotine inhalant delivery systems at 65% of the wholesale price. This new tax does not apply to approved tobacco cessation products or to marijuana inhalant delivery systems. If passed, this measure would take effect on January 1, and the increased tax would apply to all sales after that date, plus the inventory that's on hand as of January 1. And this measure is estimated to increase state revenues by $111 million in the current biennium and by $331 million in the 21 to 23 biennium. So it is a significant tax revenue raising measure. Revenue from the new and increased taxes would be distributed as follows. 90% of the additional revenue after the payment of administrative costs would be used to support the Oregon Health Plan, which is the state's Medicaid coverage for low-income individuals. And it would be used to increase the number of people who would receive such medical assistance. And these funds would be eligible for federal matching money. The other 10% would be used for tobacco prevention and cessation programs occupied by tribal, cultural, and community groups. It's interesting to note that current tobacco taxes also help fund the Oregon Health Plan. The United States Center of Disease Control reports that the highest rates of tobacco usage are among minorities, the uninsured, those with a GED or no high school diploma, and those earning under $35,000 per year. In Oregon, that income limit is actually $15,000 a year. Oregon Health Authority statistics show that 17% of adult Oregonians smoke cigarettes, and that in 2017, 17% of 11th graders in high school were currently using e-cigarettes. Supporters of this measure say Oregonians should be encouraged to quit using tobacco and nicotine products because of the danger to their health. The measure extends the current taxation to include new nicotine inhalant delivery systems, which may discourage the use of e-cigarettes and vaping products. The opponents of this measure say a tax on e-cigarettes and vaping products may actually drive people back to smoking cigarettes, which is a more medically dangerous form of consumption. And finally, that tobacco taxes are paid disproportionately by low-income individuals. Now we're on to measure 109, which Nancy will present.
So ballot measure 109 is the Oregon Psilocybin Services Act, which, as was mentioned before, will become law if approved. What it does is to allow the manufacture, delivery, administration of psilocybin at supervised licensed facilities, and it imposes a 2-year development period. So again, some background on this measure. Psilocybin mushrooms have psychoactive properties and have been considered sacred medicine among indigenous tribes with a long history of use in religious and spiritual rituals. The federal government, however, classifies psilocybin mushrooms as a Schedule I controlled substance with no accepted medical use and high potential for abuse. However, recent studies at universities, including Johns Hopkins and Oxford, have shown with small numbers of patients that psilocybin treatment can have beneficial outcomes on mental health conditions, including, but not limited to, addiction, depression, anxiety disorders, and end-of-life psychological distress. So where's the FDA in all of this? Well, because of the promise of the early trials, the FDA has given major breakthrough therapy status to psilocybin for major depressive disorder and for treatment-resistant depression. What major breakthrough therapy status means is that the clinical trials will be fast-tracked for psilocybin. It doesn't mean the corners are going to be cut, but it simply means, as I understand it, that when the documentation gets to FDA, they will look at it immediately as opposed to waiting for it to appear in the queue. There are no phase 3 trials yet. So that means that the large-scale trials that are necessary to determine the safety of a drug are not yet ongoing. So this measure legalizes, regulates, and taxes the manufacture, sale, and administration of psilocybin for mental health purposes. The proposed act is based on the 1998 Medical Marijuana Act. It's very well laid out in the voters pamphlet, which you will receive or have received, with 134 sections. And those sections describe the establishment of an advisory board answerable to the Oregon Health Authority. They set prerequisites and standards for issuing licenses and establishing service centers, such as if you're running a service center, you can't have a criminal record. They must be a specified distance from school facilities, and defines treatment protocols. The Oregon Health Authority is given a number of new responsibilities, including the licensing role, testing psilocybin substances for contamination, and disseminating research related to the safety and efficacy of these substances. In contrast to Oregon's marijuana program, the Psilocybin Act would not allow any retail sales or personal crops of psilocybin mushrooms. There'd be a role for counties and local municipalities to prohibit the siting of psilocybin facilities based on a local vote. The most prominent and distinguishing feature of Measure 109 is that the administration and consumption of psilocybin will be permitted only at a licensed psilocybin service center and only under the supervision of a licensed psilocybin service provider. The primary support for this comes from a wide variety of groups, fairly diffuse groups, such as veterans groups, such as the Heroic Hearts Project and Veterans of War, the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, Black Resilience Fund, as well as through testimonials by physicians, hospice medical directors, people who benefited from the use of psilocybin mushrooms, psychologists, representatives of indigenous people. You should know that there has been a total of $3 million received to promote this ballot measure, and with the majority of that, $2.6 million, coming from the New Approach PAC. And what do these supporters say? Oregonians with certain mental health issues, including opioid addictions, may find relief if psilocybin substances are more readily available. The program has been designed to protect patients and assure beneficial outcomes by making the substances more available under tightly controlled conditions. The consumption of psilocybin will take place only in a controlled environment and only under the supervision of licensed and trained personnel. Up until about 2 weeks ago, there was no organized opposition to this bill. But then the Oregon Psychiatric Physicians Association and the American Psychiatric Association raised concerns about the measure. Their concerns center around the fact that this is promoting the use of a substance with effects on the brain and the body by a practitioner with no medical training. In addition to these concerns, opponents say that Oregon would be in conflict with the federal drug policy, putting the Oregon program at legal risk. That the U.S. is still learning about the impact of legalizing marijuana, and it might be premature to embark on another biochemical experiment. And then, in a slightly different twist, the proposal does not go far enough. The use of a natural medicine should be decriminalized. And with that, I will turn the stage back to Pat.
Thank you, Nancy. I will be speaking about Ballot Measure 110, which is the Drug Addiction Treatment and Recovery Act. It is also a statutory measure, and it provides for statewide addiction recovery services, with marijuana taxes partially financing these services, and reclassifies possession penalties for specified drugs. Measure 110 is based on the premise that incarcerating people for drug use and addiction is costly and hasn't worked. It aims to provide more access to treatment. It is a complex proposal with 24 sections covering many pages. And if passed, it would be the first statewide law of its kind. I'm going to tell you about the main provisions. The measure eliminates criminal penalties for provision of specified quantities of controlled substances, both by adults and by juveniles. However, manufacture and sale of these substances would remain illegal. The covered drugs or any drugs listed in Schedule 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the Federal Controlled Substances Act. Drugs covered by this change include heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, LSD, oxycodone, and many others, all of which are known to have very harmful addictive effects. Possession of the specified quantities of these controlled substances would be a Class E misdemeanor and would have a penalty of either a $100 fine or the completion of a comprehensive health assessment with an addiction treatment professional at an addiction recovery center. The client need only complete the assessment and is not required to participate in any indicated treatment services or other activities. This measure would also require the establishment of at least one addiction recovery center in each of the coordinated care organization service areas of the state. Oregon is divided into 16 areas, each having its own coordinated care organization, and the entirety of Lane County is in one coordinated care geographic area. This center must be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year. And it should provide services free of charge, including what's referred to as a triage determination of any client's acute need for immediate medical care, or as well as providing connections to other services or peer support. Measure 110 also requires the establishment of an oversight committee called the Oversight and Accountability Council, and they would oversee these new addiction recovery centers and provide grants to the centers. The membership of this council must include members from at least one member from each of 13 categories. And these categories include trained professionals in substance abuse treatment, individuals who are suffering from substance use disorder, and members of communities that are disproportionately impacted by arrests. Funding for these changes, for the establishment of the centers and the council, et cetera, would be provided from required legislative appropriations to a new drug treatment and recovery service fund. And the money would primarily come from redirection of marijuana taxes. Any Oregon marijuana tax revenue above $11.25 million per quarter would be redistributed to this new fund. And this will reduce revenue for current recipients for the rest of this biennium and for future periods as well. Between now and June 30th of 2023, current recipients are expected to have their revenue reduced by the following amounts. The state school fund would lose $90 million. Mental health, alcoholism, and drug services would lose $45 million. The alcohol and drug abuse prevention and intervention services would lose $11 million. The Oregon State Police would lose $34 million. In addition, cities and counties would have a reduced distribution of $45 million, and there also would be some reduction to the money that is provided through the State Department of Corrections to local government community corrections. A little bit of other background. According to a recent editorial in the Register Guard, Oregon ranks nearly last of all the states in access to basic drug treatment. The article also states that 1 in 10 Oregonians are thought to have an addiction to drugs. In terms of support for this measure, a lot of the money for the campaign, $2.4 million, has come from the New York-based Drug Policy Alliance. There are groups very supportive of this measure and groups that are opposed to it. The supporters of the measure, which include many healthcare and treatment professionals, argue that Oregon should shift away from punishing drug addiction to a health-based treatment approach, which is an effective, compassionate way to overcome addiction. And they say that criminalizing drug addiction ruins lives, that people with a criminal record have difficulty getting jobs, housing, student loans, professional licensing. On the other side of the issue, there are other healthcare and treatment professionals opposed to the measure because in their experience, most addicted individuals refuse treatment when it is offered. They believe that removing the threat of incarceration and abandoning the collaboration between law enforcement, probation, and the drug court system will result in a revolving door of drug abuse, treatment refusal, crime, homelessness, ongoing hospitalizations for overdoses, infections, and drug-induced psychoses. In addition, that they argue that the real problem is a lack of Medicaid-funded residential treatment beds, which this measure doesn't address at all. They also are concerned that the removal of criminal penalties for drug possession could encourage youth to experiment with dangerous substances. As Nancy pointed out, there's a lot of information in the voters pamphlet on this measure as well. Actually, there are 25 pages in the voters pamphlet of pro and con arguments. So if you want more information about this, there's lots of resources out there. So now we're ready to respond to questions about the 4 state measures that we have covered. Lost sound.
Charles C., you may be muted.
Yes.
Oh, I've been muted all that time, it looks like. Sorry, gang. We'll try that again. We're going to take 15 minutes to answer questions from our audience on these measures. Remember, if you haven't already, go to the chat button and type in questions. While you're typing, I'd like to take the time to thank Nancy and Pat, as well as 3 other leaguers who are working on this webinar behind the scenes. Our webmaster and webinar guru, Rhonda Livesay, Vice President Terry Parker, who is fielding and sorting your questions, and Sharon Amasha, in charge of our league's Speakers Bureau, who coordinated the whole show. Thank you all. I'm not seeing anybody stepping up to chat and typing in questions. Now, I know there are a lot of leaguers listening, and I can't imagine that they don't have questions, but we'll wait a little longer. Here is somebody. On Measure 109, I am concerned with service providers and their qualifications, especially if they will not have a medical background.
I understand that concern, certainly, as does the Oregon Psychiatric Physicians Association. So the question, of course, is how much danger is there in using psilocybin, and the treatments have not yet been completed, for sure. One interesting fact is that there are a number of cities that have decriminalized psilocybin. So I have my list here. In May 2019, Denver did. In June, it was Oakland. In October, it was Chicago. They talked about it more broadly in terms of broader class of plants. January 2020, it's Santa Cruz. September 2020, it's Ann Arbor. Now, they decriminalize. They do not have in place the service centers and the training of the service centers that this bill has. What they mostly have done is to say to the local law enforcement, please make the enforcement low priority. And in Denver, apparently, that also means that the feds are putting it at the bottom of their list unless the psilocybin is identified with another crime. What's the point of all of this? The point of this is just that in the information that I read from Denver, which has had this in place for a while, there was no information that spoke of grave concern about the use of psilocybin. It would certainly be much better if it was done with a medical professional.
Okay, we have another question. It seems a lot of funding for the last ballot measure comes from marijuana taxes. How high are those revenues? I've heard that in California, those are not all as high as predicted because a black market still exists because the cost of legal marijuana is so high.
I guess that's up to me to answer. The figures that I was giving in my presentation came from the official ballot explanation. And it was expected that at that point that this new program, at least for the full biennium, the 21-23 biennium, would in fact receive about $180 million for use in these the new system that would be set up, the addiction recovery centers and the evaluations. So the expectation, at least in official documents, is that there is a lot of money available for this purpose, and but it would have to come from the existing uses of the marijuana tax money, which I indicated supports the state school fund to a great degree. It supports treatment programs already in place, and it supports community corrections programs as well.
Okay, Pat, we have another question about that. Will passage 109 reduce treatment of addiction of current users? Or wait a minute, that's 109.
Yeah, but I think it was intended to be 110.
Oh, you think?
Yeah.
Well, all I would say is to the extent that it takes money away from existing drug and alcohol treatment programs, yes, there would be less money available that is now being spent in existing drug and alcohol programs. And that is one of the concerns for treatment providers, is the loss of that revenue.
On the psilocybin ballot measure, are other studies on psilocybin going on that might cause the FDA to approve its use in regular medical settings? Why have Oregon experiment before approval?
Yes, there are definitely other studies going on in a variety of universities, also international studies. The reason for passing now, I think, is simply that there is a period of time that takes place before a drug can be approved. And if a drug is seen to be valuable to people, particularly people in end-of-life situations, it may not feel possible to wait. So I think that's the impetus for this measure.
Okay, and sticking to 109, do you know how they'll judge success?
No.
Probably.
The model for this is the Medical Marijuana Act. And I haven't been here long enough to know whether that is considered to be a successful act, but that's what they are looking at.
Very good. Back to measure 110. Would these recovery centers align themselves with Cahoots or Whitebird, for instance?
That's not known. The oversight and, I'm sorry, I forgot the actual title. The Oversight Council will be setting up the rules and regulations for the operations of them. And until they meet in February, we don't know exactly what they're going to have as protocols. The addiction recovery centers will not themselves provide that much treatment. They will mostly provide assessments and then referrals to treatments provided in other settings. So it's theoretically possible that they could occupy cahoots. And it's also possible that some of the people who end up coming to these addiction recovery centers are actually going to be brought there by cahoots, because cahoots is known to help people who were in some sort of crisis on the streets. And it may very well be that that's part of how the system works, that the addiction recovery centers get intake from police departments and from entities like cahoots.
Very good. And what is there anything in Measure 110 that will cause, or what is there in Measure 110 that will cause the reduction in funds to so many health services?
Well, because marijuana taxes now support programs that provide treatment services, if those marijuana funds are transferred to a different purpose by 110, those funds would have to be replaced from some other source. And I don't know what other source it is. It is the case, we already know that there is less access to basic treatment in Oregon than in many other states. And so a loss of existing funds is a concern for some people.
Very good. Nancy, back to the psilocybin issue. Are there practitioners who treat people required to be medical professionals?
No, they are not. In fact, if you look at the educational requirements for them, I don't even remember if they're required to have a college education, but they will be trained specifically in how to identify psychedelic experiences and how to deal with those. But they will not be medical personnel, and they will not have the resources that medical personnel have to deal with a person in a bad trip.
Very good. Looks like we don't have any, oops. Oh, well, wait a minute. Let me see. Nope. Looks like we don't have any more questions. We're good, Terry tells me, for questioners. Thanks, all you voters. We may have enough time at the end if you think of anything else that you want to ask. But now we're going to go to our local measures. And Pat, we'll start with you. And by the way, people, don't hesitate to ask questions while the presentations are going on. Although that might be hard. It'd be impossible for me to type a question and try to pay attention to the presentation. But most of y'all are better than I am about that. So, all right, Pat. On to you.
Okay. The first local measure we're going to talk about is one put up by the city of Eugene, which is Measure 20-309, and it is the renewal of the 5-year library local option levy. And so that's the question. Shall Eugene levy $2.85 million per year for 5 years, beginning next summer, to maintain the current level of library services? And this measure would renew existing current local option taxes, which expire in about 6 months. The local option levy was originally approved by voters in 2015 to address cuts in the city of Eugene funding for library services. Back in 2010, with a slow economy and steadily rising personnel expenses, the city made significant cuts to its overall budget, and cuts to the library's part of that budget impacted hours of operation, librarian hours, and the purchase of library materials, such as new books, magazines, newspapers, books, audiobooks, etc. In response to these lack of services, the voters in 2015 approved a Eugene Library local option 5-year levy that has been used to increase operating hours and to increase the number of free programs, to purchase new materials and technology for all the Eugene Public Library locations, which are downtown, the Sheldon area, and the Bethel area. This current levy expires in June of 2021. So ballot measure 20-309 asks voters to renew the levy that was approved, and so that the library continue having the 47 additional hours of being open across the library locations, the 1/3 increase in free programs for all ages, the Maker Hub area programming and upkeep, and to replace the internet-ready devices at Bethel and Sheldon Branch Library locations that can be taken out. These are like iPads that can be checked out, and they're in need of refurbishment and renewal at this point. This levy will generate $2.85 million a year for 5 years, which would be a total of $14.25 million over that period. And the estimated tax rate for this levy will be 15 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. And this is a slightly lower tax rate than was in the original levy. It is estimated that the typical Eugene taxpayer will pay an average of $37 per year over the 5 years of this levy period. The measure does require the preparation of an annual report on spending that will be made available to the City Council and to the public. Current demand for library services is high. Since the pandemic, demand for the library's virtual resources have grown 75%, and nearly 1,000 new library cards have been issued. The renewed levy can help the community address COVID-19 impacts in many ways. The first one is to support student learning success with high quality educational resources, including online tutoring and traditional books, including information access opportunities such as mobile Wi-Fi hotspots and other internet-ready devices available for checkout. The library can also help address community, economic, and employment impacts, such as by cooperating with agencies like the Small Business Development Center and the Chamber of Commerce, and by offering resources such as business and career materials for retraining and skill development. And then finally, the library can provide access and inclusion by assisting all individuals in their use of library resources and offering programs to target specific populations and focus outreach on underserved and underrepresented populations, such as people of color and individuals who have no or inadequate internet access. So there are, of course, arguments put forward by supporters and opponents. An argument for a yes vote is passage of the levy will continue the current hours of service at all 3 branches, increase programming for children and youth, increase budget for materials and internet access, and increase off-site delivery of programs and outreach. Without passage of this levy, services will return to their pre-2015 levels. And this levy is not a new tax, but continues the current levy at a slightly lower rate. And again, the cost per taxpayer is $37 per year. Arguments for a no vote include, given the current economic uncertainty, it's a bad time to ask for funding, and some people may find it difficult to pay for the levy. And also, there are those who believe that library services should be provided by the City of Eugene's general fund, not by a separate local option levy. I will now turn the program over to Nancy, who will discuss Measure 20-311 related to Springfield services.
Thanks, Pat. So ballot measure 2311 is the Springfield, Oregon local option levy for fire and life safety services. It provides funding for fire and life safety services in Springfield. You may be wondering why, if the fire engine says it's Eugene Springfield, we are talking about a Springfield local option levy. Since 2011, Eugene and Springfield have operated under an intergovernmental agreement between the 2 cities to share certain key administrative positions in both departments to provide cost savings by eliminating duplication of service, hence the name. This levy involves only the Springfield costs for fire and life safety services. Approval of this measure would replace the current 36-cent levy that expires on June 30th, 2021, with a 38-cent levy. The rate is anticipated to provide the same level of service as the current levy rate, considering the effects of inflation on the city's operating costs. In the first year, a typical homeowner with an assessed value, not a market value, of $164,000 would pay $62.32 under this levy. The arguments for a yes vote are fire suppression and emergency medical services are critical for the community and need to be adequately funded. The levy renewal will allow continuation of existing services with only a slight increase in the tax rate from 36 cents to 38 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. That could cause property taxes to increase more than 3%. The arguments against are, again, renewing the levy may cause hardship for those struggling financially due to the pandemic and wildfires, and fire and life safety services should be funded from the basic city budget, not a special levy. So with this, I will turn the floor back to Pat.
I'm going to talk to you about ballot measure 20-312, which is a measure put on the ballot by the Upper Willamette Soil and Water Conservation District to establish a permanent tax rate limit. And the question that you will see on the ballot is, shall the district adopt a permanent rate limit authorizing a levy of up to 7 cents per $1,000 of assessed value beginning in fiscal year 21-22? The first thing I want to state in my presentation is that most voters in Lane County will see this measure on the ballots because most Lane County voters are residents of the districts. This may come as a surprise to you. So I'll start with some information about the district and its geographic area and purpose. The Upper Willamette Soil and Water Conservation District encompasses the Willamette River drainage in Lane County, including all the tributaries, such as the Mackenzie River, from which Eugene draws its water, the Middle Fork, the Long Tom, and many others. It also includes all the cities in that drainage, such as Eugene, Springfield, Junction City, Cottage Grove, Bonita. The district doesn't extend to coastal Lane County because that is a different watershed. The Upper Willamette Soil and Water Conservation District is a legal subdivision of Oregon state government with oversight by the Oregon Department of Agriculture. And there are 45 such districts around the state. The district promotes voluntary efforts to improve water quality, protect drinking water, improve soil health for local food production, support forest health and fire resiliency, enhance fish and wildlife habitat, conserve natural areas, and provide natural resource education. Yes, a lot of things. The district does not make or enforce regulations. The district is governed by a locally elected directors and has worked collaboratively since its formation many decades ago with landowners in a variety of federal, state, and local conservation agencies, such as the Eugene Water and Electric Board, local watershed councils, land trusts, and nonprofits. The district has previously not levied any property taxes. Its funding to date has been through Oregon lottery grants, which have been leveraged, just a minute, gotta turn my page here, leveraged to support resource management projects. However, the district's strategic planning review has highlighted the limitations of the current funding level and resources, which are not dependable or sufficient to respond to the many requests for assistance that the district receives from landowners and agencies. Thus, the district is asking voters to approve a permanent tax rate limit of 7 cents per $1,000 of assessed value to establish a sustainable source of funding, beginning with in the 2021 year. This rate, which cannot be increased, would result in a $16 annual tax for a home assessed at $231,000. The new funding would allow the district to address a backlog of restoration and preservation projects and to leverage more money for the watershed councils and would support more local projects for rural and urban areas. And as in all measures. There are some arguments for a yes vote and arguments for a no vote. The people advocating a yes vote say this small levy of about $16 per year for a typical home will allow expansion of vital district programs to improve and protect natural resources. Voluntary collaboration on projects builds community in that area, and widespread wildfire destruction and contamination of land and water resources require new efforts in support of the environment. Those in opposition say a new tax could create stress for those who are impacted by the pandemic and the wildfires. And most residents know very little about what the district is doing, how it works. And then finally, the district is an agency of the Oregon state and should be funded by state government. So we're on to Nancy for one more measure, which is the Bethel School District bonds.
So this is the ballot measure 314. I should mention that, as I think Charles mentioned in the very beginning, not all of the Lane County measures are included in this presentation because they don't pertain to people. And this ballot measure will also not pertain to you, will not appear on your ballot if you are not in the ballot, the Bethel School District. So the Bethel School District 52 Oregon bonds, repairing, replacing facilities. It's the issuance of general obligation bonds for repairing, replacing facilities. So what does it do? The measure asks that the Bethel School District be allowed to issue $99.3 million in general obligation bonds payable from property taxes. This measure is estimated to not increase the current obligation, the current 2021 tax rate for bonded debt. The Bethel School District is qualified for $6 million in state grants, which will be awarded only if the bonds are approved. The funds will be used for hands-on vocational training in technical and trades programs, repairs to district schools, and installation of energy-efficient ventilation, and replacement of Cascade Middle School, which was built in 1955. The bond is estimated to not increase the 2021 tax rate. Old school bonds are being paid off, and the 2020 bond would replace the old bonds at the same tax rate. That means that basically your taxes would not increase. The current rate is $1.61 per $1,000 of assessed valuation. Current interest rates are at historically low levels. And again, a reminder, if the bond is approved, then they will also get $6 million in state funds. What are the arguments for the measure? The bonds are not expected to increase the tax rate because the old bonds are being paid off. The current property tax rate for Bethel School District is actually 41% lower than it was 10 years ago. State funding for schools is dedicated to staffing, but facility maintenance, repairs, upgrades, and construction must come from each school district. The state will not pay for textbooks or building needs. The measure is transparent. There's a list of specific projects. For example, improve security systems designed to help keep schools safe, which are identified for this bond measure. You know what you're getting. What are the arguments against the measure? Now is not the time to spend money on new construction. Taxpayers could use a break from paying for bonds, and vocational education programs are a distraction from basic instructional programs. They do not need a special learning place. And with that, I will turn the program back to Charles for your questions.
Okay. So far, we don't have any questions about those measures. Please feel free to step up and hit that chat button and start to type. I wanted to let you know that it was mentioned that about several times about the voters pamphlet. It's probably, I don't know, is it backwards to you? But anyway, this is a really handy thing. And if you haven't already recycled it, it's got a lot of information in it. And especially since we're getting a lot of questions and even disinformation about vote by mail, this is a really, can debunk all of those. One of them is the county compares signature on the ballot envelopes to the signatures on the voters registration record. And they're trained in forensic handwriting analysis for when they do this. And if you forget to sign or your signature doesn't match, the county will notify you. And you'll have until as much as 14 days after the election to prove it was you that sent in the ballot. So a lot of things like that in your voters pamphlet. And one of them is more information. The Upper Willamette Soil and Water Conservation District, it, as Pat said, isn't something that we see very often, but they, as well as many other organizations that have interest in the election, will have information on their websites or again in the voters pamphlet. So feel free to check that out if you feel like you need more information. Okay, we do have a question on 2312. The $16 per annum only applies to property owners. What about those of us who do not own property? Is it unfair to property owners to carry this burden when there are those of us who are not paying our fair share?
Well, that's an argument you hear a lot, but it is the case then when a landowner owns rental property, the rent includes the money to pay those property taxes. So the argument that renters don't pay property taxes or contribute to things like that, I don't think is accurate. They don't write the check directly, but they are paying the property taxes through their rent. The landlord is not just giving them a break and paying them for them.
That would be a great landlord if they did, but they're business people and they plan on making some money on that. Good question was answered sort of with the Bethel tax, Bethel School District. If we don't live in Springfield or Bethel, do we vote on those measures? And no, you don't. We had to choose. There were, I think, about 10 Lane County measures, and we chose the 4 that had the likelihood of affecting most of the people that would come to this webinar. So that's the answer to that.
The safeguard to that is also that they will not appear on your ballot, so you don't even have to worry about it.
Yeah, you're not asked to vote for anything you're not allowed to vote for, so that's a comfort. Is there here's another question, is there any indication that the population is increasing in the Bethel School District?
I can't answer that question, but I'd throw it open to any of our team who might know better than I do about that.
Nobody step in.
Well,
ahead,
I would
Pat.
say there has been a lot of new residential construction in the Bethel area over the last 10, 15, 20 years. Whether and what level that will continue, I don't know. But there has been growing population in that area in the last many years.
And that's the way that generally goes. All right, and looks like we've run out of questions right now, unless I've skipped something. If anybody else has some questions about these or the former state ballot measures that we talked, you got a few more minutes. And I should be giving more plugs to the league. You can see there on your screen that we have our voters guide at lwvlc.org, as well as schedules for those forums for candidates that will be co-sponsoring. Check those out. And also anything that pretty much that we do will be taped for a while. So, and on our website. So if you've missed it, or if you know of anybody who wants to look at it again, please feel free. Okay, and let's see. I want to thank everybody for their attendance and your participation. It's really important, again, to our democracy, to our republic, that we have informed voters. So thank you all for your attention. If anybody, any of our panelists have anything that they want to say, Pat or Nancy, that is left on their mind, we're good? All right. Well, that's the end of our session. We hope you found it helpful. If you want to see it again or recommend it to others, like I say, it'll be on our website along with other voting information. Check out another one that's very good is vote411.org for in-depth ballot information. And in fact, you type in your address and it'll tell you what's on your ballot so you can prepare for that. And by the way, if your ballots are going to be mailed on between the 14th and the 20th of this month, if you don't get it by October 23rd, call the county elections office. And I'm going to give another plug. We're going to have a third Thursday webinar with our speaker is Dr. Patrick Ludicky. He's the Lane County Health Services Officer. I'm sure he'll have some interesting points about what's going on now regarding the pandemic, particularly in Lane County. So, thank you.
And I will say that will be on the third Thursday, which is the 15th this week. And Chelsea, does our website tell you how to get to that webinar when it happens or how to sign up for it?
Rhonda, can you give me a yes or no on that one? No, yes. I think it does. Yes, it is on our website, probably prominently placed. Be sure and respond as soon as you can, as soon as you know. We'd like to have them by Monday prior to the Thursday. And this is the third Thursday of the month coming up, to let us know where to send the invitation for the webinar. Okay. All right. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for all of y'all behind the scenes and in front of them. Glad we were here. And thank you all for listening and vote. Bye-bye.